Sam Harris, a 73-year-old farmer whose family has tilled Lacy County soil for nearly a century, faces an unimaginable threat, losing his beloved farm to an auction over unexpected back taxes. Despite a lifetime of honest work and meticulous payments, bureaucratic errors and overlooked mailings after his wife's passing left him owing $14,000. Clutching his life savings in wage, Sam attends the auction with quiet determination. But the auctioneer cruelly dismisses him, refusing his cash and having him escorted out, leaving Sam heartbroken and on the verge of losing everything. Yet, as he sits in despair, exclusive black SUVs with the state flag roar to a stop, signaling an unexpected turn. If Sam Harris's unwavering spirit resonated with you, please consider supporting our channel. Like this video, subscribe, and share to help us bring more stories of quiet dignity and perseverance to light. Your support helps ensure these vital lessons inspire generations to come. People like you don't belong here. The words hit Sam Harris like a slap, not just in the tone, but in the cruel certainty behind them. The auctioneer didn't just say it, he growled it, contempt dripping from every syllable as he yanked the registration form out of Sam's weathered, calloused hands. A ripple of snickers followed, echoing across the ornate auction hall, each one a small dagger. At 73, Sam stood rigid, envelope clutched tight to his chest, an envelope filled with every cent he had managed to save. Not just money, his life's work. Without so much as a warning, two security guards materialized. No words, no explanations. They flanked him, took him gently but firmly by the arms, and began to escort him out. He didn't resist. He didn't have to. His eyes stayed fixed forward, his jaw set like stone. The room watched in smug silence, satisfied with what they saw, an old man dismissed. But what no one noticed, what not a soul in that room considered, was the security camera mounted by the entrance, its unblinking eye recording every detail, every insult, every injustice. And just moments after Sam vanished through the door, 5 black SUVs emblazoned with the state flag came roaring to a stop at the building's grand front steps. Doors flew open, boots hit pavement. Governor Melissa Grant had arrived, and everything was about to change. Sam Harris hadn't simply chosen the farming life. He had inherited it, blood and bone deep. He was born into it, as sure as the Kansas sun rises without asking anyone's permission. His family had farmed the soil of Lacy County for nearly 100 years. The Harris name was etched into the land itself like a signature written in sweat. It had started in 1927 when his grandfather, Elijah Harris, first broke ground on a piece of stubborn, rock-strewn earth. Elijah didn't have machines, he didn't even have help. What he had were 2 hands and an iron will. He hauled stones out of those fields by himself, one at a time, refusing to surrender even when the sky turned brown with dust and the winds of the Great Depression stripped the land bare. Others fled. They packed their dreams into trucks and left. But not Elijah. He stayed. He stayed when seed wouldn't sprout, when hope dried up faster than the creeks, when all signs told him to quit. He planted anyway, trusting in something larger than the season. It wasn't blind faith, it was resilience, born of bone-deep stubbornness. George Harris, Sam's father, inherited more than just the farm. He inherited the grit. He didn't cling to the past blindly. He embraced the future with both hands when he had to. Tractors, irrigation, better tools. But he never forgot the rhythm of the land. To George, farming wasn't just work. It was a dialogue, a sacred exchange between man and earth. And only those who truly listened could understand its language. Sam was raised in that quiet conversation. He learned early to read a storm before it showed on the horizon, just by the scent the wind carried. He knew how to repair a broken fence with a single strand of wire and more patience than most men could summon. He knew how to find life buried deep in hard soil and how to coax it up again, season after season. He wasn't just connected to the land. He was the land. Every sunrise he greeted, every seed he sowed, every harvest gathered in his calloused hands. Each was a reaffirmation of an unspoken vow that had traveled through generations. This land wasn't his to own. It was his to care for, to shield, to preserve. That was the legacy. Men like Sam Harris rarely show up on the news. Their lives don't come with headlines or applause, but they are the pillars of small-town America. the invisible strength that holds everything else upright. Their victories are quiet. A healthy calf born in a winter storm, a wheat yield just enough to cover the bills, a leaky roof patched before the next rain. That's success. That's life. They live by codes the world has forgotten. Honesty, loyalty, persistence. They do the work not for glory, but because the work is worth doing. In a culture obsessed with speed, spectacle, and viral fame, people like Sam are easy to miss. But they embody something real, something lasting. The clearest form of the American ideal, quiet dignity earned through toil. They believe in building something that outlives them. They plant oak trees knowing they'll never sit under their shade. They mend barns not for themselves, but for a future where maybe a wedding will take place in the hayloft, where laughter will echo through rafters they once patched. They pour themselves into the land expecting nothing in return, no spotlight, no parade, just the knowledge that they left the world a little more whole. And yet, in the machinery of modern society, people like Sam are often overlooked. Decisions that reshape entire communities are made in boardrooms where no one knows the feel of dirt under their nails. Laws shift, prices drop, farms fold. Still they keep planting, still they hope, still they endure. Sam Harris was never one for speeches. He didn't see himself as a symbol, didn't care for causes or slogans. He saw himself as a caretaker, a steward. One link in a chain forged long before his birth and reaching far beyond whatever future he had lived to see. His bond with the land wasn't forged in words, but in work. It was loyalty without language, love without conditions. And in that unshakable silence, there lived a strength the world had long forgotten, but could never truly erase. It wasn't nostalgia that drove Sam that morning. It was something deeper, older, nearly sacred. Not sentiment, but duty, clear-cut and unwavering. That quiet morning, the weight of it all wrapped itself around him like the early mist blanketing the fields he had known since boyhood. He buttoned up his best blue shirt, the fabric soft with age and use, tucked an envelope into his worn jacket, inside it, the sum total of his life savings, and started the engine of his weary old pickup. It groaned like it shared his burden. As he rolled down the familiar country road toward town, it wasn't just money he carried. It was a promise, one made long ago and whispered over decades through wind and soil, carried in the voices of his father and grandfather and the men before them. A vow passed down like heirloom seed. Hold fast, stand your ground, and never, never let the land go without a fight. For most of his life, Sam Harris clung to the belief that the world made sense if you just lived honestly. Work hard, honor your word, settle your dues. That was all it took. He'd learned it early, walking rows of wheat and corn with his father, the smell of dirt and sunburnt earth steeped into every lesson. And he'd lived by that creed. Sam paid his bills the way his father had, by check, in person, whenever he could. On time. Always. He didn't trust machines with names like the cloud, had no use for smartphones or apps. The digital world passed by him, and he let it. Every receipt he ever kept still sat carefully folded in an old metal filing cabinet that creaked when opened. A cabinet that held 40 years of proof that he'd always done things the right way. So when the letter came, stiff envelope, official seal, Sam almost didn't open it. He figured it was routine. Maybe a tax notice. Maybe some zoning update that wouldn't mean much. It sat unopened on the kitchen table most of the day. That evening, he finally picked it up, settled into his chair, slid on his glasses, and broke the seal. His heart slowed as his eyes scanned the thick black stamp at the top. Notice of public auction. At first, it didn't register. He blinked, reread it, squinting as though better focus might change the words. But they didn't budge. His farm, the Miller place, his family's land, was listed among the properties being auctioned off for unpaid taxes. Sam's chest tightened. He read the letter again, then again, searching for a mistake, a misprint, some bureaucratic confusion he could easily clear up with a phone call or visit. But the numbers were solid, unfeeling. The notice said he owed nearly $14,000 in back taxes he had no clue about. The next morning he drove into town early, the letter clenched in his hand, worn fingers curled tightly as if he could squeeze the truth out of it. At the county office, a young woman, barely older than his youngest granddaughter, greeted him with that soft, practiced smile people wear when they have no real power. She listened, then explained gently that things had gone sideways after his wife passed the previous year. The property had been reassessed, but there'd been mistakes in the paperwork. Notices might have been mailed, but were likely overlooked or misfiled. A series of tiny administrative errors, each one so small, yet added together they'd turned into something massive. Penalties, interest, late fees, all stacked up until the total became something unrecognizable. By the time anyone realized, it was already deep into the legal process, and unless he paid the full amount, there wasn't anything anyone could do. Sam stood there quietly, nodding while she talked, his hat held in front of him like a man at church. He tried to follow her words, but they felt slippery, like water through cupped hands. He wasn't used to systems that moved without people behind them. He came from a world where problems were solved with a handshake, where your word was your signature. Now he found himself staring into the faceless mechanics of modern governance. Automated notices, digital filings, cold screens, and scanned signatures. Somewhere along the line, the world had changed, had shifted under his boots like dry earth in a drought, and he hadn't noticed. Not until now. He walked out of that building feeling unmoored, lost. For Sam, security had never been about money in a vault or numbers glowing on a screen. His wealth was measured in acres and seasons, in the certainty that the sun would rise over his fields, that the land would keep asking for care, for seed, for harvest, in the rhythm of things that didn't need explaining. Now all that seemed to unravel with a single page of government stationery. There was a time, years ago, when Sam would have charged into the problem, sleeves rolled, back bent to the task. He'd have outlasted it, outworked it. But the truth now pressed on him like the weight of a hard frost. Age had changed things. His hands, once strong and fast, now trembled by day's end. His knees stiffened each cold morning, and every step seemed to ask more than it used to. He moved slower. He thought slower. And this wasn't a problem that could be fixed with sweat. It required paperwork, attorneys, deadlines, and Sam had never felt more out of place. There's a certain cruelty to aging that no one warns you about. The very institutions you have trusted for decades begin to look through you. Systems you once understood now become twisted corridors of rules and regulations. You miss a single letter, forget to file one form, and suddenly you're not just behind, you're drowning. And those tiny oversights, those cracks in the wall, can widen into something deep enough to swallow everything you've built. But even with all that pressing in, confusion, exhaustion, the quiet panic of losing what he loved, Sam didn't buckle. He wouldn't allow himself to. There had been too many Harris men before him, standing where he now stood, refusing to give up the land without a fight. And he wasn't about to become the one who broke that line. Sam Harris had always believed that doing the right thing, no matter how quietly or stubbornly, would be enough. Whether the threat came from a misplaced decimal or some faceless bureaucratic blunder, he didn't dwell on blame or outrage. With that same quiet grit that had carried his family through dust storms, trench warfare, and the leanest years of the Depression, Sam resolved to face the challenge head on. He wouldn't hire a lawyer. He wouldn't appeal to strangers on the internet for help. That wasn't his way. He did what he knew: show up, pay what he owed, and stand his ground. That was all. He had no idea the world he trusted so deeply would reject him so coldly. He couldn't have imagined that simply standing with dignity might still have the power to rattle the very bones of a system built to ignore men like him. Before the sun had even begun to push its light over the horizon, Sam was awake. Not because of nerves, not because of dread, but out of habit. The same internal clock that had nudged him out of bed for almost 70 years stirred him again. But this day was unlike the others. This day wasn't about tending to cattle or checking fence lines. This day was about something deeper, more sacred. The right to keep the land that had soaked up the blood and sweat of his family for generations. Under the dim yellow light of the bathroom, Sam stood at the sink and shaved, slowly, carefully. The blade scraped along the grooves and lines of his worn face. His hand wasn't as steady as it used to be, but the routine mattered. It always had. Once clean-shaven, he combed back what hair remained with deliberate care and dressed himself in the pale blue shirt he wore only to church or funerals. He smoothed the creases down with the flat of his palm. It was a simple act, a quiet gesture of self-respect. He knew that a man's worth should never come down to appearances. But today, that old truth didn't feel like enough. Today he needed to be taken seriously, and every detail mattered. Reaching beneath his mattress, where he kept the things that mattered most, he pulled out an old postal envelope, soft with wear. Inside, every single bill had been counted and arranged with precision. He had done the math over and over again, and he counted it once more to be sure. $14,370. Enough to settle the debt, enough to keep his land. He tucked the envelope into the inside pocket of his jacket and pressed his palm over it for a moment, just to feel it there, just to be certain. Then he stepped into his faded '92 Ford pickup, the one that had long since lost its shine, and drove into town. As the road stretched out, the landscape shifted from open pasture to concrete, from old tractors to new SUVs that gleamed too brightly in the morning sun. Outside the courthouse, men in tailored suits leaned against sleek cars, sipping lattes that probably cost more than Sam's entire breakfast. None of them paid any mind to the weathered truck pulling into the far end of the parking lot. If they noticed at all, they saw only the battered boots, the threadbare jacket, the figure of a man they assumed the world had already left behind. Inside the grand courthouse hall, the air buzzed with quiet intensity. Speculators and developers huddled in tight groups, their voices low, eyes sharp. Sam made his way through them without speaking. He found a registration table in the back and carefully filled out the paperwork, his pen moving slow and steady across the lines. When he finally stepped up to the desk, the young woman behind it hesitated. Her smile wavered as she looked him over, her expression changing in a blink. She leaned in and whispered something to her colleague. Moments later, a man emerged from the side of the room, sharp suit, gleaming gold watch, and the practiced confidence of someone used to control. "Mr. Harris," the man asked, his eyes flicking down at the registration form. His brow tightened. "You're planning to pay in cash?" Sam nodded and reached into his jacket. "I have the full amount," he said, pulling out the envelope. The auctioneer didn't even glance at the money. His voice lifted, just enough to slice through the murmurs of the crowd. "We require a certified check or a bank guarantee. This isn't a flea market." Laughter rippled through the room. Quick, dismissive, cruel. Sam's shoulders straightened, but he said nothing for a moment. Then he spoke, calm but firm. "The auction notice didn't mention anything about that requirement." The auctioneer gave a dismissive wave, already turning away. "Security will escort you out." Just like that, 2 uniformed guards appeared, not aggressive, but undeniably clear in their intent. They each took Sam gently by the elbows, not with violence, but with a kind of polite finality that allowed no room for resistance. As they walked him toward the exit, Sam could hear it. The low laughter, the murmurs, the small, poisonous kind of amusement people save for those they think don't matter. The sound didn't sting, it burned. And still, he said nothing. He just walked out, holding his dignity as tightly as he had held that envelope. Sam didn't protest. He didn't speak a word in a defense. Without so much as a raised voice, and with his chin lifted in quiet dignity, he held the envelope close to his chest and walked steadily through the imposing courthouse doors into the unforgiving morning sun. There was no drama in his exit, just a man holding on to what little he had left, moving with a kind of strength that those inside that grand building would never understand. It's a strange measure, the way society assigns value to a man. In Sam's weathered hands, there was more integrity, more decency etched into the calluses and lines than most of those polished men had displayed in their entire lives. But that didn't matter here. His boots were covered in dust from a long life of work. His jacket, though sturdy, was worn with time and use. His money, though hard-earned, wasn't folded into pristine banking envelopes with logos and gold seals. And for those reasons that shouldn't have mattered at all, he was dismissed, disregarded, invisible. In that courtroom, filled with tailored suits, crisp collars, and calculated smiles, Sam Harris wasn't anyone worth remembering. America loves to talk about how it honors grit, determination, and good, honest labor. It builds slogans and campaigns around those ideals. But too often, those virtues are only recognized when they come dressed in a tailored suit, spoken through the right accent, backed by a shiny business card or a senator's handshake. Sam didn't have any of that. What he did have was a life built on the very values others only talked about. He had lived them, and every season, every storm, every stubborn patch of earth on his land bore witness to that truth. But that morning, none of it counted, because he didn't look like the success they celebrated. He was cast aside, treated like an afterthought, an inconvenience to the business of the day. He sank heavily onto the tailgate of his old pickup, the same truck that had carried tools, feed, and grandkids. The envelope was still tucked safely in the inside pocket of his jacket. His hands, steady and confident when welding a fence post or guiding a plow, shook just a little now. Not from anger, not even from humiliation. The tremor came from something colder and more final. The recognition that in the world outside his fields, a man's worth was no longer measured in how long he'd endured, how hard he'd worked, or how loyally he'd lived, but in how well he could present the right image. His identity had been reduced to papers, appearances, and signatures. He looked up at the courthouse, its rigid stone and cold columns, standing like a monument to things he didn't understand and didn't belong to. There he waited, not hoping anymore, just bracing for what he knew was coming. The loss. The final blow. Everything he had built, cared for, bled over. It was all about to slip away, to be passed to someone who had never walked its furrows or tasted its dust. He didn't know it yet, but fate was already in motion, and it was arriving fast, wearing a sharp navy suit. He remained on the tailgate, his fingers clasped tightly around the envelope that now felt like it weighed more than the sun pressing down on his shoulders. Inside the courthouse, the auction carried on without pause. His farm, his father's farm, his grandfather's before that, was just another line item in a catalog of assets. Soon it would belong to a stranger, someone who had never known what it felt like to dig their fingers into that soil, someone who wouldn't recognize the smell of the barn after the first rain. To the system, Sam Harris had become nothing more than a statistic, a transaction to be filed and forgotten, a legacy dissolved by silence and indifference. Then a sound broke the stillness. At first it was distant, muffled and unclear, but it grew louder, insistent. Sirens, engines. Sam squinted toward the horizon, the sunlight blinding as he raised a hand to shield his eyes. Then he saw them, 5 sleek black SUVs roaring into the courthouse lot, their windows tinted dark, their movements precise and deliberate. 2 police motorcycles flanked the convoy, sirens cutting through the heavy air. Each SUV bore a small but unmistakable emblem on its doors, the state flag. The doors swung open in perfect unison, and agents poured out, their eyes scanning the scene with swift professional intent. The center vehicle remained closed for a beat longer. Then its door opened, and she stepped out, Governor Melissa Grant, a woman known across the state as relentless, brilliant, and utterly unshakable. She wasn't here to shake hands or make a scene. She was here for purpose, and she moved like it. Her navy blue suit cut a sharp line against the heat-hazed pavement, her stride purposeful, immune to the whispers that now buzzed through the stunned crowd. The very people who had chuckled under their breath when Sam had been let out, those investors, clerks, and officials, were now scrambling to step aside, to give her room, to not be in her way. The courthouse lawn, once full of idle chatter and smug faces, turned into a frozen tableau of shock and uncertainty. Local reporters fumbled with cameras and recorders, voices rising in confused questions and speculation. But Governor Grant didn't slow. She didn't look at them. Her gaze was fixed, her posture commanding. She entered the courthouse as if she owned the ground beneath her heels. Governments often feel like machines, slow, heartless, tangled in tape and paperwork. And most days they are. Decisions buried under layers of policy, action lost in the shuffle, people forgotten. Justice delayed or denied, but not always. Sometimes things change because someone within the machine decides that it should. A leader, rare but real, can look past the fine print and see the person behind the file. Governor Grant, a seasoned politician with the instincts of a strategist, had read Sam's letter, and something in it struck her. Not just words, not just another plea. It was the voice of a man who had nothing left to offer but the truth, and that had been enough to move her. Inside the auction room, the auctioneer was mid-sentence when the governor's voice rang out. Strong, unwavering. This proceeding is temporarily suspended. Everything stopped. Bidders turned to each other in hushed murmurs. Heads craned. The auctioneer froze, his face pale, mouth slightly agape. When someone near the dais asked where Sam Harris was, he stammered and gestured toward the exit. "Find him," Governor Grant ordered her aides, her voice leaving no room for hesitation. Moments later, Sam Harris, dust on his boots, worry in his eyes, envelope still gripped like a lifeline, stood face to face with the most powerful person in the state. Sam removed his cap, a quiet instinct of respect taking hold as he stood before one of the most powerful people in the entire state. Under her calm, unwavering gaze, he suddenly felt small, like a boy again, unsure of what to do with his hands. "Mr. Harris," she greeted, extending a firm hand toward him. "I received your letter." Caught off guard, Sam stumbled slightly as he reached out to shake it. "I didn't expect... I never thought..." Her voice remained even, edged with a gentle warmth. "I read every letter that crosses my desk." A faint smile tugged at the corners of her mouth. Maybe it wasn't always true. Maybe most days, letters like his were screened or filed away by someone far below her pay grade. But whether it was a political move or a personal one, that didn't matter right now. What mattered was that, for Sam Harris, today, this moment, it was true. Governor Grant turned to her staff. Her voice shifted into a tone of practiced command. She issued an administrative hold on the Miller property transaction, citing Regulation 42B due to improper notification of sale terms. Sam blinked, struggling to make sense of the bureaucratic jargon. He didn't know all the codes and clauses, but he understood what mattered. The sale was off, at least for now. Real leadership isn't loud. It doesn't announce itself with flashing lights or hollow slogans. It happens quietly, often in rooms like this one, where someone chooses to see beyond paperwork and policy, to recognize the people behind the process. Governor Grant didn't halt the sale for convenience or to chase public approval, though she must have known what the optics looked like. She did it because somewhere along the road of governing, balancing budgets, signing bills, reviewing reports, she hadn't lost touch with something fundamental, that the purpose of government, at its best, is to serve. There are moments in history when quiet courage stirs something larger. Rosa Parks sitting firm in her bus seat didn't end segregation by herself, but it sparked a fire. A lone man standing in front of a tank in Tiananmen Square didn't topple a regime, but he forced the world to look. These acts, rooted in dignity, visibility, and the refusal to disappear, carry echoes that stretch far beyond the moment. Sam Harris hadn't come to be a symbol. He wasn't trying to start a movement or lead a protest. He showed up with an envelope full of his life savings and a simple, stubborn belief that fairness still mattered. And because one person in power had chosen to truly listen rather than dismiss a farmer's quiet resistance, the gears of bureaucracy, slow, heavy, and impersonal, shifted. Standing there, the envelope still clutched against his chest, Sam didn't feel triumph. Not yet. What he felt was something even more sacred. Something he hadn't known in days. Hope. 3 days after the auction, the call came. Sam almost didn't answer. Unknown numbers rarely called his landline, an old dust-covered thing in the kitchen, but something told him to pick it up. The woman on the other end spoke with a calm, careful tone. She said she was from the governor's office. There were still a few matters to discuss, she said. Would Mr. Harris be willing to come into town again? After hanging up, Sam sat for a moment, the receiver still in his hand. A dull weight settled in his stomach. Maybe they'd found a technicality, some loophole to reverse it all. Maybe that little spark of hope had been premature. Still, he put on his blue Sunday shirt, the one he saved for funerals and county meetings, and drove the old pickup truck down the same dusty roads. Each mile stretched longer than it should have, like the truck itself could feel the tension building in his chest. But this time, something was different at the county administration building. Staff who had once barely acknowledged him now greeted him by name. Their smiles were no longer curt or obligatory. They carried a note of warmth, even regret. He was led to a modest conference room where a few county officials were already seated. Coffee was offered. Sam, still feeling out of place, gave a quiet nod. The county administrator cleared his throat and gently pushed a thick folder across the table towards Sam. His words were few and careful. He explained that a thorough review had revealed errors in the tax assessment, errors that should never have triggered the auction. The process had been flawed. And now officially, Sam's land was no longer at risk. It was fully, legally his again. Sam let out a long breath, slow and heavy, as if months of weight were finally draining from his chest. But before he could fully gather his thoughts, the administrator spoke again. There's something else. A second envelope was placed in front of him. This one was smaller, neater, sealed in elegant ivory paper. The woman from the governor's office smiled, her eyes kind. An individual has come forward, she said softly. They've offered to cover any remaining financial obligations tied to your property, and more. Sam's entire body tensed. He pulled back slightly, shaking his head. I don't take charity. Her tone remained gentle but firm. It's not charity, Mr. Harris. This person considers it repayment. He stared down at the envelope for a long moment before finally opening it. Inside was a letter, handwritten in a neat, deliberate script, each word placed with care, each stroke purposeful. Dear Mr. Harris, when I was just 10 years old, my family stood on the edge of ruin. We had nothing left, no money to buy seeds, not even enough food to get us through the weeks ahead. We were frightened and we were hungry. Then you showed up without asking for anything in return. You handed my father a paper bag filled with seeds from your own shed. You didn't just give us something to plant. You came out to the field and showed my father how to coax life from the stubborn, resistant earth. That garden, the one born from your kindness, carried us through the darkest year of our lives. I've never forgotten that. Today I have the chance to offer back a small piece of the generosity you gave us, even though you never knew how deeply it saved us. I was just a child then, one of the many who used to run laughing through your fields. Thank you for everything. Sam read the letter twice, then let it rest on the table, his fingers slightly trembling as they released the page. He tried to bring the boy's face into focus, tried to reach back through the blur of time, but all he could summon were fragments. Seasons passing, faces merging, moments fading. He couldn't recall the boy clearly, but that didn't matter. Back then, it hadn't been about charity. He hadn't done it for recognition or gratitude. He'd simply done what felt right. And yet here it was, this quiet moment, decades later, returning to him like a forgotten seed breaking through the dredge-hardened soil. The smallest gestures, the ones made without fanfare or expectation, often echo the loudest across time. We scatter kindness like seeds, never knowing which ones will take root, or where they'll bloom or when. Sometimes they come back to us not as flowers, but as lifelines, arriving just when we need them most. For Sam Harris, it wasn't only his farm that had been pulled back from the brink. It was something larger, proof that dignity, compassion, and quiet decency never vanish. Even when they go unseen, they're never truly lost. They wait, patient, buried deep, until their season arrives. Sam never could have imagined that a grainy black and white security video would be the spark that changed everything. Yet, only hours after Governor Melissa Grant stepped in, the footage spread across the internet like fire through dry grass. The video, an elderly farmer being led out of a courthouse, head bowed but spirit unbroken, followed by the governor's dramatic arrival, captivated the nation. Local news stations were the first to broadcast it. By nightfall, it was airing coast to coast. For one rare, unexpected moment, Americans from all walks of life found something they could agree on. Dignity mattered. Conservatives praised Sam for his grit, his fierce loyalty to the land passed down through generations. Progressives saw in him a quiet defiance against systems that crushed the voiceless. His story managed to bridge a divide few thought possible. Newspaper headlines called him the farmer who stood alone and won. Talk shows dissected the scandal, peeling back the layers of the auction's corruption. Pundits called for sweeping reform. But through all the noise, Sam remained unchanged, a steady, grounded presence. Fame wasn't something he wanted. If anything, it left him uneasy. He hadn't fought for attention. He'd fought for his home. So when the invitation arrived, asking him to speak at the state agricultural fair, Sam nearly turned it down. He wasn't a public speaker. He didn't polish words or rehearse speeches. His strength had always come through calloused hands, not microphones. His life was measured in crops and weather, not headlines or applause. But then Governor Grant called him herself. She told him his story mattered, not for the attention it brought, but for the change it could inspire. She urged him to speak, not as a symbol, but as a man whose quiet courage had already sparked a movement. And so, on a sunlit Saturday afternoon, Sam stood at a wooden podium, facing a crowd larger than any he'd ever seen. His knees were unsteady. His fingers gripped the stand tightly. He wore his best shirt once more, crisp and clean, and tucked into his jacket pocket was the old envelope, now empty, that once held the last of his savings. His voice was uncertain at first, gravelly with nerves. "I'm not a politician," he began. "I'm just a farmer. I didn't come here to make speeches or start anything. I came to fight for the only home I've ever known." He paused as the giant screens behind him displayed the video again, the one that had sparked 1,000 headlines. It showed him being led away from the courthouse, shoulders firm, head low but not defeated. The image hung there, quiet and powerful, like a flag that needed no words. "What I've learned," he said, his voice gaining strength with every word, "is that doing the right thing doesn't always mean being the loudest voice in the room. Sometimes it just means standing your ground, even when nobody's watching." When he finished, a hush settled over the crowd before applause broke like thunder. Many had tears in their eyes. At the close of the event, Governor Grant returned to the stage. With steady hands and a firm voice, she announced a new initiative, the Family Farm Preservation Act. Its mission was clear: to shield long-standing family farms from predatory auctions and bureaucratic failings. The legislation was a direct response to Sam's stand. His quiet strength had not only protected his own land, it had reshaped the way the system would treat others like him. Sam Harris had never set out to be a symbol, but in standing for his home, with quiet dignity and unshaken decency, he became something more than he ever expected. He had stood not just for his land, but for something far greater, something deeper and older than any law or institution. In defending his little patch of earth, Sam Harris became a symbol of resilience, of quiet defiance, and of the soul of a nation too often overlooked. He reminded the world that the strength of a country isn't found only in skyscrapers, profits, or political debates. True strength is planted in the quiet lives lived far from the spotlight, the people who rise early, work with their hands, and ask for little except the chance to keep going. One man, one farm, and a story that demanded not to be forgotten. As the days turned into weeks, the media storm slowly passed, just as Sam always knew it would. Cameras disappeared, reporters moved on, headlines faded. The noise receded, but the impact of what had happened remained. For Sam, life eased back into a rhythm he understood with his whole being. At dawn, he rose like he always had. He walked the fields, row after row, boots sinking into the soil that had known him since boyhood. His hands, calloused and sure, found comfort in old habits, the same gestures passed down through generations. And though the farm had once stood on the brink of being taken, it now pulsed with new life. It felt whole again. More than that, it felt honored. The story that had once felt like his burden slowly began to bring about quiet change. It started small, almost unnoticeable. A local teacher brought her students by to learn not just about agriculture, but about history and conviction. Children who had never seen a working farm before listened wide-eyed as Sam spoke simply, honestly. Neighbors, those who had once only offered a wave in passing, now came to help mend fences, harvest crops, or sometimes just to sit on the porch and share coffee in silence. No one made a fuss, and Sam, true to who he had always been, never sought thanks or recognition. But the people around him found ways to let him know that he mattered, that what he did had made a difference. Through it all, Sam never changed. He remained steady, grounded, humble, a man shaped by seasons, rooted in a tradition older than memory. His was never a story of bold speeches or dramatic declarations. It was a story about the quiet kind of courage, the kind that does the right thing even when no one's watching. It was about the kind of strength that doesn't boast or break, but simply endures. In today's world where everything moves so fast and attention is pulled in 100 directions, it's easy to feel like ordinary lives don't count. When systems grow too big and voices too loud, the quiet ones get drowned out. But Sam Harris proved that even the softest voices can carry far when spoken with conviction. His life was a reminder that hard work still matters, that dignity can be quiet, and that community doesn't have to be loud to be strong. At a time when headlines celebrate the powerful, the controversial, the glamorous, maybe the real power lies elsewhere. Maybe it lives in hands like Sam's, weathered, firm, and steady, hands that build what lasts, hands that protect, nurture, and give without asking for applause. Maybe it's not always the noise that changes the world. Maybe more often than we realize, it's the steady heartbeat of someone who refuses to give up. If you've ever witnessed someone whose quiet strength changed a life, or even a community, you know how deep that power runs. These stories matter. They deserve to be told, remembered, passed down. And if you believe that too, let's keep sharing them. Let's make sure people like Sam Harris are never forgotten.